Hindus makes their true intentions very clear. So what have we done so far to take on this hateful conference? First of all, I'd like to thank many Hindu organizations and leaders in the US and around the world who have done fantastic work in trying to push back against this hateful conference and narrative. And I want to thank them again from the bottom of our hearts at HAF for all the work that they're doing. But I want to talk a little bit specifically about the work that HAF has been doing and what the progress that we've been made so far and where we go next. So to start with, at the beginning when this was first brought to our attention, HAF and our legal team specifically sent 2 direct letters to 40+ presidents, provosts, and communications departments at all the universities that were listed as co-sponsors of the event. We launched a global grassroots letter campaign. Over 900,000 emails were sent within a matter of 24 to 48 hours. That's close to 10,000 individuals taking action. We followed that up with a global petition where another 10,000 people signed that petition, and that was sent off to all the universities. We've been working directly with university alumni, faculty, and elected officials to support the health, safety, and security of students on these universities across the country. We've had a fantastic social media campaign to raise awareness about these issues. We've also pushed back against this hateful Hinduphobic narrative through media appearances by our staff, podcasts, blogs, and many press statements. And what have we accomplished so far? Well, we've had some major wins, although the fight is not over yet. We've galvanized the community, not just here in the US, but around the world, who are tired and fed up of this Hinduphobia. We've gotten the university logos to be removed from the conference website. This is a strong indication that the initial use of the logos was unauthorized and against the policies of most universities and policies that they have on the appropriate use of their logos. We've also heard back directly from several universities disassociating themselves from the event. We've also heard back from some that rather than disassociating, unfortunately, have clarified that it is the department and that they support academic freedom. But again, let us be clear, what they are engaging in is not academic freedom. It is far from it. So what comes next? Well, we're continuing at HF to work the back channels and work in a targeted strategic manner. At the same time, and even before this conference came up, the Hindu American Foundation had filed a lawsuit for defamation against Audrey Trishke and the leaders of several other organizations, including the Indian American Muslim Council, the Federation of Indian American Christians of North America, and the so-called Hindus for Human Rights. That is happening in parallel to all the work that we're doing here on this conference. But now the more important question comes up, what can all of you do to continue to help and push against this narrative? It's critical, first of all, for those that have direct ties to any of the universities that have been listed or the departments within those universities that have been listed on the conference website to make their voices heard, including parents, alumni, and donors. Parents and alumni should reach out to student affairs, alumni relations, and diversity and inclusion staff at all these universities. Now, for those that are not within the US, there are 200,000 Indian students attending universities in the US. That makes up 20% of the total number of foreign students studying here in America. It's important that the Indian government and wealthy Indians funding these universities and the chairs at these universities and departments, including many of those involved in these events, make the safety of Hindu students, faculty, and staff an important and essential part of their relationships and partnerships with these universities. And it's incumbent upon you as Indians from whoever is attending this event, but even beyond that, to make sure that they write to the Indian government to ask them to ensure that the safety and well-being of Indian students is in fact protected, and that they do not continue to partner with those universities that peddle in Hinduphobia and anti-Indian hatred. And we will be sending a number of resources and template emails that you can send after this event. So it'll be easy for all of you to take action, whether you're here again in the US or across the world. And if you do receive responses from universities, please do send it to us at info@hinduamerican.org. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, is to actually attend the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference from September 10th to September 12th. And the link for that conference will be in the chat shortly. And ask tough questions at that conference. Counter them, challenge them, but make sure you do it in a respectful manner. So please be on the lookout for additional resources to deal with this global issue of Hinduphobia coming shortly after the event. Now, I want to ask you also that besides the support we need to take action and make things change to counter this event, we do need your support financially. None of this would be possible without financial support from donors across the country and the world. We are doing this on limited resources, limited bandwidth, and limited staff, but we're going to continue to fight. But we need the resources to make sure that we have the equipment that we need, the funds that we need to continue the fight for as long as it takes, whether it's on the legal front, whether it's on the advocacy front, or whether it's on the education front. So please do donate generously. You can donate more broadly to HAF's work. You can choose a specific program such as our legal fund to help fund our lawsuit against Audrey Truschke and her Mary Fellows. But please, whatever you do, please do support our work. And now, without further ado, I want to turn it over to our esteemed speakers for Fireside Chat. We're very fortunate to be joined by two very esteemed speakers today. Our first speaker is Rashmi Samant, a graduate from the University of Oxford. She made international headlines when she was elected as the first Indian female president of the Oxford University Students' Union. She made headlines again when days after being elected, Rashmi resigned after being on the receiving end of a vicious cyber mob attack by far-left and anti-Hindu activists, who targeted not only Rashmi, but her parents as well. The Thames Valley Police confirmed that it was investigating the event as a hate incident, and Oxford University completed its own investigation to which both Rashmi and her attorney expressed vindication. Rashmi completed her studies at Oxford in climate science this year and is now engaged with the British Parliamentary as a staff member. She is a fierce advocate of both human rights and climate sciences. You can follow her on Twitter at @RashmiDVS. Our second speaker is Lavanya Vemsani. Dr. Lavanya Vemsani is a multi-award-winning scholar and distinguished university professor of history at Shawnee State University in the Department of Social Sciences. Lavanya is also the honorary visiting professor at the JNU University, New Delhi. She holds 2 doctorates in the subject of religious studies from McMaster University and history, University of Hyderabad in India, respectively. Her research and teaching interests are interdisciplinary and multifold and include ancient history and religions, as well as the current history of India. She's published several books, including Feminine Journeys of the Mahabharata and numerous articles on history and religions of India. She's the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Indic Religions, 2020 to 2023, and associate editor of Canadian Journal of History and the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs. She's also served as the president of the Ohio Academy of History, and if that's not enough, is active on Twitter, where you can follow her at Professor Vemsani. And last but not least, the conversation will be moderated by HAF's very own executive director and my co-legal counsel, Suhag Shukla. With that, Suhag, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Samir, and namaste to all of you from all around the world. This issue, as Samir said, has galvanized our community in a way that we have never seen. I know there's people from Australia. I'm watching this chat from India, from Tampa, Florida, I mean, across the United States. So thank you for taking time to be here for this very important conversation, which promises to leave you inspired and a little bit more knowledgeable about the state of Hinduphobia, specifically on college campuses. Before we begin, I want to start with some nomenclature to make sure that we're kind of speaking in the same language. Sometimes we use words and everyone has different meanings to it. And so part of having a conversation requires understanding. And so we need to be on the same page in terms of definitions. So I want to do that, and then also set kind of a big picture so that then we can hear from both Lavanya as well as Rashmi from their experiences on college campuses. So first and foremost, HAF has adopted the working definition of Hinduphobia, which can be found at understandinghinduphobia.org. This definition was composed by scholars at the first ever conference on Hinduphobia held at Rutgers. And this is what the definition is. Hinduphobia is a set of antagonistic, destructive, and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Sanatan Dharma, Hinduism, and Hindus that may manifest as prejudice, fear, or hatred. So I know there's a lot of, we should be using this word, we should be using that word. This is the word that HAF has adopted. And I do feel that it is important for us as a community to galvanize around certain language and certain usage, because if we keep fighting about words, we're going to miss the opportunity to educate others about the stream of attacks that are coming against our community in various forms, whether it's implicit or whether it's explicit. The second thing I want to do is just paint a little bit of a broad picture. What underlies the motives which lead institutions or individuals to think, say, or do things that are Hinduphobic? And these are just my hot takes. The list is by no means exhaustive, but I have identified, at least in my experience working with HAF and my team as well, 5 independent and overlapping themes that broadly cover the underlying motives. And they are religious supremacy and exclusivism, racism, colonialism, Marxism, and modernity. So the second thing I want to talk about is where are these attacks coming from? And I think that our challenges come both from external actors as well as internal actors. So what are the external actors motivated by? They tend to be motivated, when I mean external, I mean outside of the Hindu community. They tend to be motivated by religious supremacy, religious exclusivism, and racism. And the challenge with the external actors is that they generally have greater access to wealth and power as a result of colonization. The internal actors are, to me, probably the most heartbreaking, because it's our own eating our own, meaning that these are people who are from within the Hindu community. They're professors to activists, and they tend to be motivated, of course, by the legacy of colonization, but also notions of modernity, where modern is equated with sophisticated and Western, and anything Hindu and traditional is associated with retrograde or being backwards. The second thing that they're oftentimes the underlying kind of phenomenon that might be propelling the motivation is a sloppy and uncritical force fitting of the Marxist oppressor-oppressed framework onto Hindus as a majority, which we're not globally. This Marxist framework is especially harmful in America, where people of Indian origin make up 1.2% of the entire population. We are even a subset of that 1.2. So we're talking micro minority. So that sets the scene. And without further ado, I'm going to just launch into the questions. Lavanya, I'll start with you first. You are where I would say in the lion's den. You're in the academy. On top of that, you're in history and you're in religious studies as someone who's openly Hindu. So does Hinduphobia impact what is studied in Indology and how it's studied, and what have you seen in your experience?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me, and thank you for a nice introduction. You have covered the definitions and what is going on. Staying within the academia for the past decades. So I have noticed a number of trends. There is a trend that had already been there because of the colonialist, imperialist interpretations. When Indology began, of course, people have published on history of Indology. So the imperialist influence is known. And first studies on Hinduism are actually done by some who have been considered scholars, but card-holding members of Nazi party. So those are there. The beginnings are, of course, not so good. That is there. But it hasn't been changed. Of course, it has been decades, but it hasn't been changed. The trend still continues. The trend can be seen in two ways. The first one is denying the existence of religion, denying the existence of people, denying the existence of everything that comes from India. For example, Hinduism, Aryans, it all came from outside. It doesn't exist. If it exists, it's not yours. It came from outside.
Right.
And the second trend, is to misrepresent, misinterpret, and misjudge and popularize notions that confuse populations. And we discussed this before, Suhag. The story about this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, how this verse is quoted in one of the Panchatantra stories. And it was taken out of context to show that Vasudhaiva Kutumbam is not as a positive verse as it is quoted to be. And I have many of my friends who work on sacred texts and how they are quoted in media and stories and movies. How does a text quoted by somebody in a story change the value of a text? That doesn't happen to any other text. It happens only to Hindu text. And the scholars, of course, I don't think they don't know it. They know it, but they still write confused stories like this. Somehow misrepresent what is quoted as not positive, but negative, or maybe less valuable by quoting out of context quotations. That is not done for any other religious text, Bible or any other text. It is isolated and done for Hindu texts.
And it seems that, I'll just ask a follow-up question, but it seems that what the meaning of a text is as a lived reality for Hindus, is that even a question that comes up? Or is it just a literal enterprise?
Yeah, it's sorry to say, but it is. The Hindus are mute subjects. They cannot speak, they cannot express, they cannot object to anything that they have written. The way verses are interpreted, the way subjects are written, it comes from their viewpoint, their worldview. Anybody that speaks up against it has no value. Their arguments are ruled out as being emotional or are worse. So the subjects are mute. The interpretations are out of the way. So Hinduism is stuck in this kind of ethos that it's at this juncture, right? Hindus cannot speak. If they speak, they're judged as emotional or are worse. And they don't take or they don't question or ask their subjects. Their subjects are mute. All the interpretations come from their own interpretation, which is based on these imperialist origins that it already had. So most of the time, studies on India and Hinduism, most of the time is spent on how to deny. If you cannot deny, then confuse it or somehow misrepresent it. Most of the studies would do that. Of course, Hinduism, they go on and say there is no Hinduism. Hinduism was never named. Of course, it was named. In the ancient world, no religion is named. Hinduism is one of the earliest geography to be named. It was named 600 BCE in the Greek sources. And they tell you, no, Greeks never mentioned it. It's Persian sources. No, it comes from Greek sources and it's one of the oldest. And the people, the land, the religion, the practice, everything, the language is also called by the same name. That's the reason we have Hindi. So Hindu land, Hindu ocean, Hindu religion, Hindu people, so how can you deny it? So then the next denial goes to, denying the people. Okay, you don't belong to this land. You came as invaders from outside. So anybody that regards Hinduism is outsider. You are Aryans. And there is no evidence for Aryans anywhere. Who are these people? So the goal is to confuse people about the existence of the culture, existence of the country, existence of everything that is there. Or interpret the stories and verses in the wrong way to confuse if they cannot deny them. If it is possible to deny them, of course, there will be denial. If it cannot be denied, then it will be confused with out of the way interpretations, just like the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The verses would be taken, verses, stories, characters, Draupadi or Arjuna, Rama, Sita, anyone, taken out of context and then interpreted to show that they are not as positive as they are regarded to be, which is not true. But the whole idea is to generate confusion, not really prove anything. So the whole idea is to have confusion, and the confusion lead to of course, not really believing what the subjects are speaking. So the subject Hindus would, of course, become mute, because with all this confusion, they cannot speak. If they speak, they will be labeled Hindutva or any kind of names, any number of names. They do this to everybody. So, of course, study of Hinduism is not fair. It hasn't been fair for a long time. It has to be changed. It has to be re-examined. All these questions and concerns have to be readdressed for the subjects, for the Indians to get a voice. As long as this stays under this veil of misjudgments and misinterpretations, the subject voice would be mute. That is what is happening. So in the subject area, this status quo continues until the subject and until the way we interpret is changed. So,
So let me shift to Rashmi then. Lavanya has talked about the impact of Hinduphobia on the academic study and this larger framework. It's like you have lenses on. They're not pink. I want to say they're like, I don't know, gray or some putrid color. And that's the only thing you end up seeing because it's either Protestant biased or colonial biased or whatever it is. What sort of impact does this have on university students? So can you walk us through, especially for those folks in our audience who may not be familiar with your story of what you faced in Oxford?
Firstly, thank you, Suhadji, for having me on this event, and namaste to everyone. For those who don't know a little about myself, I am Rashmi Samant, and I was recently elected the first Indian woman president of the Oxford Students' Union. It's quite a prestigious position in the global politics because a lot of the presidents have gone on to become premiers of various countries. It was well celebrated by our community and well taken. There was a lot of press. But no sooner than hours of me getting elected, a vicious hate campaign started against me. It initially started with me receiving a bunch of hate mails and hate messages, the usual kind. But I was very prudent to stay off of it and shield myself from them by getting off of these platforms, by putting in a lot of filters and all of that. And then it got to a point wherein they started to infiltrate my work email ID, which is my university email ID, the ones which we used to turn in assignments day in and out, to communicate with professors day in and out. It's a very sacred email ID that you use on a daily basis. And if you continue to receive 100 hate mails on it on a daily basis, then it does a little bit to your psyche. But I continued to ignore it. But then press started to give legitimacy to all of these baseless sort of narrative about me. And then it got onto the university press, the sort of press that we have, the student press. And then it started getting picked up by the national press in the country, in the UK. And since I'm an international student, it was picked up by the Indian press as well. And before I knew it, it had become an international incident. And everybody was calling me names from extremist to Islamophobic to racist to, I mean, you name, all of the extremist terminology was used on me. And without any, proper solid concrete evidence that I was all of these things, people had just believed it. Because I think, like Professor Lavanya and yourself have set the premise that there's a lot of colonialist and imperialist definition which is out there. So it's not hard for people to believe all of these things because it's constantly fed through through minor things that it becomes instinctual almost for people to accept these things and to believe it without looking for further proof. Because
It's a hard bell to unring. Once someone calls you that, it's out there, right?
out there. But I think we need to also establish that if the same sort of names were given to another student who perhaps wouldn't be Hindu, it wouldn't have been very easy for them to believe all of these things. They would have looked for harder proof, for more solid
Yeah.
proof. Here it's almost instinctual because it's a learned habit. When you're habitual to something, you trust it without questioning. You trust certain things without questioning because it's become a learned habit for you. And all of these rhetorics are fed through sublime things like adverts, through sublime text within comics, within movies even. This Hinduphobia is something which is pushed into products and into the media that we consume on a daily basis in a very sublime way that it almost becomes a learned habit before we know it. And then when incidents like this erupt, it's very easy to accept all of this and suddenly brand someone because it's become an instinct, it's become second nature to you without questioning anything. And I definitely feel that innocent students can get branded and vilified within no time if they're not careful about maintaining a certain politically correct persona about themselves and disassociate themselves with everything that is considered to be retrograde by the mainstream media and academics in today's day and age, which is very heart wrenching, given that it's such a beautiful religion. It's our dharma, which has taught us so much and given us strength. As practitioners, I'm sure we know how much strength we derive from our dharma in daily life. And it's sad that our own students don't have the freedom to express themselves very clearly on a campus where they're supposed to learn, share, and grow. So, yeah.
Thanks for that. And it's heartbreaking. And at my age, it's difficult. I can only imagine the difficulty. And, one of the things that I know that happened to you, and it's happened to people that are close to me, where, what our parents get dragged into it, which is, it just adds an additional level of insult to injury. So I'm very sorry. I know that it's not my place to have to apologize for anything, but fundamentally, it's not something that you should have gone through. So moving on to my next question though, Lavanya, speaking of labeling, I've spoken to several academics who have been labeled soft Hindutva. Their scholarship is labeled as such, without any critical engagement to the merits of the theories posed or the arguments that are made. It's clearly used as a pejorative, even though the question of what is Hindutva, I think, is a legitimate academic question, because there are so many meanings to it to different people and to different political parties, as well as to the Indian Supreme Court. But in the academic space, how I've seen it lodged against academics in listservs, it is clearly a pejorative. So what would you say is the effect of this kind of labeling on both scholars and scholarship in terms of funding, in terms of, panels, where do you get invited, all of that stuff? If you could just unmute.
Yeah, for sure. When the label is thrown, it's thrown at you for a reason, not just for it's not as innocent as they project it to be. Of course, it has effect for the academics. We face we are thrown labels at us. Many of my colleagues have faced that. So some of us are isolated to bear these labels. And if anybody supports or if anybody talks in support, they are labeled soft Hindutva. Of course, funding and panels and all this gets affected. On top of that, even small activities. So if we are, for example, if we are organizing a conference or something, we share the call in one of the listservs. Immediately, somebody would write, this is Hindutva. It's so. And if anybody supports or says anything in support, they were like pushed aside. And if anybody continues to support, of course, they were dismissed from the listserv. This happened to many. So there is indirect effect that they are not invited to panels or they're not invited, and of course their funding gets affected. That's all indirect, not direct. But direct also is there. Directly they are attacked, they're called names, and on the listservs they are labeled and pushed aside. Their work, their calls, everything is pushed aside. That is there. And of course, this is also carried on into the society. For example, they started using Hindutva only recently. In the first decade of this millennium, until 2008, they did not use Hindutva. They just said Hindu terrorism. So using this word Hindu terrorism, Hindu extremist, Hindu, this word had really grave consequences. One of the temples in Hamilton was burned in 2001 following the September 11 incidents in New York. I really think there is a direct connection between how the media projected Hindu extremists, Hindu terrorism, and some politicians have also come and spoke on the media that Hindu terrorism is dangerous and that kind of things. Of course, nobody is speaking that this doesn't exist, right? There is a narrative that is being built within the academia, within the media, and some politicians are also fanning the flames. So it's going to affect somebody somewhere. So the temple in Hamilton, I don't think it burned for nothing. It burned because of the misinterpretations, misconceptions that were put forward in the public narrative. Of course, the narrative is built in the academia, in the schools, everywhere else, but this goes out. This goes out into the media. This goes out into public memory. The public doesn't realize that, but they absorb it. I'm really happy that Rashmi had brought this up. So it comes out in activities. The people are blamed. Then their temples are burned, and in future, maybe it's not temple, it's people that are burned. It can happen if this type of campaign continues, and if this type of vilifying one religion, one group of people continues, this would lead to dangerous consequences. This would happen. This happened before Holocaust also. People were labeled as many things, as less than, their practices were less holy. And that's the reason many Jewish and many Roma and all these were, easily put in the concentration camps. So labeling a group of people as something less of optimal is always a problem. Yeah. And also issuing labels where it doesn't exist. Hindu extremism or Hindu terrorism doesn't exist. But putting that in media and some politicians speaking as if this is fashionable is going to lead to really, really dangerous consequences. And we have already seen that. So it's very important to counter this narrative, very important to speak about this and argue against this narrative. This is dangerous, not simple issue or not simple label.
Right. And I mean, if in I tweeted today actually that, this Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference wants to study this global, quote unquote, global phenomenon of Hindutva and to, kind of identify then what other supremacist movements that these Hindutvavadis, which apparently all of us are because we oppose the conference or we're critical of it, or supremacists, whatever word they want, that we might join other supremacist movements where I don't like the terminology necessarily, but we're brown or people of color. We are considered heathens. we're considered infidels. So I think those are all pretty much bar to entry on most of the actual global supremacist ideologies. So there's a little bit of a logic equation problem there. But shifting to you, Rashmi, these labels, you had the front end impact of it, but they've been directed towards other students as well. We know what we saw on the Rutgers campus, where students who were expressing concerns about the type of rhetoric that a professor was putting out in social media, or even kind of the contents of the nature of scholarship, they were all labeled right-wing nationalists and whatever. These are second and third generation Hindu Americans largely. So when you face something like that, you were faced with an avalanche of accusations, which you have stated were untrue publicly. How do you think that affected other Hindu students when they see your example, that here's someone who's made history? It should be a day of celebration, or a year of celebration, and then they see you take a fall. What were you hearing from other Hindu students? Did they support you? Were they kind of speaking to you in hushed tones? I know that's what happens to us, where academics or even professionals are speaking to us in hushed tones about these types of things. So what concerns were they expressing, if any?
So I think it's a very important question to answer, because the reaction is important, because I think that's what drives the sort of narrative, or the sort of thing that will happen in a future event. With me, I think there was a mixed reaction. There were few people who stood up with me in various groups, because the incident had become so much that it started become talking points in bigger groups that we were a part of. And in the groups, it was very interesting, because there were few people who would vocally support me there, and then they would get really heckled by the rest of the group. And then it would end when I would leave the group, but then a bunch of people who didn't say anything on the group would come back to me silently, say, "You're with you, Rashmi.
Yeah.
Sorry this what happened to you," and all of that kind of a thing. So
Mhm.
there was this, plethora of reactions. But the people who supported me were ultimately labeled Nazi. I mean, there was one person, there was a Jewish girl who supported me, and she was labeled Nazi. I mean, that's the power of labeling. That
Mhm.
they stop at no ends to discredit someone, and because logic fails, this is what they resort to. I was a democratically elected leader, that too with one of the biggest majorities ever seen in the entire history of Oxford Union elections. And when they couldn't defeat me in the election in a democratic way, this is what they did: run a hate campaign, run a smear campaign against me, and compel me to resign. So this was the best thing that they could come up with, because they cannot take me down in a very in a legitimate societally accepted way. And the reaction was also very mixed, and people are scared to come out and speak about their experiences, just because I've been through this very publicly. A lot of the people have come up to me and shared their own experiences, some of them even from Oxford, very surprisingly, but they still don't want to go public with it. They don't want to speak about it, because once there is a public record of something like this ever happening, it's
Right.
a threat to future prospects. You could forever be branded, a certain way, and you could lose a job. You could be kicked out of your job. You could lose upon some opportunities in the future, because these things stick. They have a habit to stick, and Hindus are very scared of this. They're scared that these things will stick to them, and that they will not be able to overcome it in the sense.
Yeah.
So I think that is a turning point, but I think we've had enough.
Yeah.
We've, it's like that tipping point, we kind of we go into our shells, we work harder. I think that's the general reaction that Hindus have every time we are labeled a certain way or we are treated unfairly. We just go back into our shell. We work 10 times harder, 100 times harder. We keep working hard, we keep pushing through, but we never fight back. But I think we've reached a tipping point where nothing we do is enough, and the attacks at us is incessant. So Rutgers is a great example of students standing up for themselves. I
Mhm.
stood up for myself, and I came out of it unscratched. I'm a British parliamentary staff now, and
Right.
it's we have a lot of we have a lot of checks, and they don't hire people who have records and stuff like that. This thing didn't stick to me because I stood up for myself, and I think beyond a point, people can also make a distinction between what's right and what's just incessant bullying. The day we start standing up for ourselves and not care about things sticking to us, as long as we are truthful and we know that we are right, we will come out of it. And what we need is more people standing up for their rights, more people supporting people who stand up for their rights, and being vocal about things which are right, and not just speaking in hushed tones after a major accident. Because after a major accident, if there's something wrong going on, you don't want people to come after that and console you. You want people to come there, intervene, and help you get out of that situation.
That's right.
So I think we need to be mindful of that. And every time we see our own people being unfairly targeted, we need to stand up for them in that moment instead of later sending condolences to the person. But I think I'm very lucky that way. The entire Indian community stood up for my rights when I started speaking. And eventually, when they saw that there was a lot of support coming my way, a lot of the people changed their stance. I still remember a lot of media houses suddenly overnight taking down articles that I'd written about me so loosely and uploading the right versions. I still have, I think it'll make up for a very funny story in the future. But suddenly everybody took it down, and then they started updating it. And then once the Indian voice grew stronger, people from across the world started lending their voice, and it just got stronger and stronger. A very senior mentor told me that in Kali Yuga, Sangatan is Shakti. So I think that is something that I saw in my own case. The community came with me, they stood behind me very strongly. And none of these falsities stuck to me. And I think that's what we should do going forward in the future.
Well, you're very in a weird way, this horrible experience gave you wisdom that a lot of people have to wait well into midlife to get. So now we're looking forward we're looking forward to exactly. We're looking forward to your trajectory. I have two more questions before I turn over to audience questions, and I will take the liberty, given that we have so many people here and so much interest, that will extend just a little bit, if it's okay, by maybe 10 minutes with our speakers. So my last two questions, then I'll phase to questions from our audience. But many administrators, specifically to this Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, have been saying that they're committed to academic freedom. Well, guess what? So are we. And we never have asked for canceling the event. At least every organization that we know of that's been active on this have not. They seem to be overlooking the fact that this is a political event. It's not open to dissenting views. Its messaging is outright political, activist in nature, and Hinduphobic. So I understand that there's a line between the rights of scholars as citizens and the responsibilities that they have to their students as educators, and to be academically honest. And then departments, I would assume, have similar responsibilities. Does that line get crossed in scholar activism? And when it does, or maybe I guess that's a redundant question, but is there a way to strike a balance between the individual rights of professors as citizens of a democracy, and then student rights and the responsibility towards students?
Right. This is this is a question, especially for scholars working on Indian studies and Hindu studies, because Indian studies, Hindu studies had been pushed into kind of a pit. It hasn't come out. And most of the scholars teaching these are involved academics, but they're also activists in their own way. Many of them are activists. So the line should be balanced, but some of them actually forget it. When they go into the classroom, what matters is facts and the subject. But as we already know, if for Indian studies and Hindu studies, there are no facts. Anything can be written. And Indian subjects or India as a subject is mute. There is nothing much they can talk or contribute. So the narrative is already there. There are efforts going on to change this narrative, but the problem is there. The line is crossed very often in many areas, but in the Indian studies and Hindu studies, it's crossed very often, very frequently, because of the nature of the way the subject is constructed. The academia thinks they are actually doing a favor by interpreting these subjects and enlightening the natives in a certain way. So, yeah. This notion maybe knowingly or unknowingly makes them cross the line because they're visualizing themselves as doing something of this, this is civilizing the natives. So
right. So what would you recommend a student does if they're in that situation?
I would the students to be active. The students should be united, as Rashmi said. They have to stand up for themselves, and they have to come together united and also stand up for the issues. They cannot just ignore and work and think that it will go away. It's not going to go away. If you're facing it, it's important to pursue official channels. Speaking to the counselors, speaking to the academic advisor, speaking to your student peer, groups, and speaking to others is important. And then coming out with the help of others, not just going at it by yourself, because you're still younger, you're a student. It's important to have compatriots support you. So don't ignore it. The most important thing is don't ignore it. Don't ignore and think that, if you work hard, 100 times harder, it's going to go away. And, it would actually affect you even more. It would affect you psychologically, give you trauma later on, and it would affect your academics also. So stand up for yourself rather than being, bogged down later on. It's better to work it out. Yeah.
Good advice. So let me ask you, Rashmi, and then I'll turn to audience questions. Same question, but as a student, what impacts, both positive and negative, has scholar activism had on your learning experience? And what's your view on what a balance between scholar rights and scholar responsibilities to their students would look like?
Well, I think I was a direct sort of victim of scholar activism because a scholar at the university came after me. So I'm a big proponent of absolute freedom of expression. Yes. But like Professor Lavanya mentioned, this freedom is just afforded to some communities and not to others. And we are muted the moment we start to speak. And one of the bigger rhetorics that come up is that we are subscribing to something, that we are not from this generation, that we're from some older stuck-up generation that is very traditional. But I think this activism is very dangerous on campus, because scholars, academics, they're professors, and they have a lot of credibility. Students, there's almost a hierarchical sort of setup within the university wherein students respect and listen to what the academics tell, what they teach. And when something comes from them, there's usually a lot more trust placed in whatever knowledge they impart. So I think there is a moral responsibility for it to be as unbiased as possible to their personal opinion. However, there's space and time for them to express their personal opinions, be it on their columns in newspapers, be it their social media, but not directed as experiments on students and target them and make them subject to their social experiments, because students are supposed to be learning, and they're within a protected environment where they learn, where they understand things. And when scholars use their activism on students, it's almost like treating students as lab rats and not as equal humans, because they're basically applying all of their learned theories and biases on someone. So it's almost like experimenting on them, and I think it's very unethical. In science, we've banned it. I'm a woman in STEM, so we've banned it. So I think it's about time that this sort of experimentalism is banned in other fields of academia, as history and social sciences are concerned, wherein academics, under the garb of freedom of expression, use their own students as lab rats.
And I think we're seeing kind of the effects of that increasingly so with when you have generations coming out that don't know how to engage with difference because they haven't seen it modeled well, when you haven't been exposed to different viewpoints, or when you haven't been encouraged to explore, then we impact how we relate to our neighbors, how we, relate to our broader communities, especially in democracies. So very much agree with what you said, Rashmi. So we have some questions. What I'll do is ask you to maybe answer them rapid fire, and I will provide them rapid fire as well. So I will ask Rashmi this question. Someone has asked if we have informed the government of India about this particular situation. We have, but what was or what should have been the government's response in your case, if any? Is there a role for the Indian government in, especially Indian students, facing this sort of attack in international universities in the US or anywhere else?
Yes, I think as Indian citizens, the government does hold certain responsibility. And I don't know what the premise is, because I haven't interacted too much with them, but I think there is definitely a broader plan that can be developed, and it shouldn't be more reactionary, but something that's in place as a safety net in case something like this happens. So I think a lot of programs can be developed to lend support in the long run.
Great. Lavanya, let me ask you this. This is from Sunil. As an academic, I feel that we have not started building our narrative. Could you please share your thoughts about why and how our community can engage academics who are committed to kind of a emic understanding, or at least an understanding of Hinduism as an emic or a lived tradition, and get that sort of narrative out there?
Thank you, Sunilji. We have to do more publications, more creation should come from our side, from the academics as well as practitioners. For a long time, we have been colonized, so we have been taught to be quiet, taught not to ask questions. We have been fighting among ourselves because we have been pushed down too narrowly. So we have to begin cooperating with each other, even though we have dissenting and different viewpoints. And then we have to publish more viewpoints on every media, in media, social media, as well as publications, print, and everything. So more publications is important. The community can actually support by listening and supporting the publications, supporting the research of the academics that they recognize. They can see this work and recognize, and they can see the activists and recognize, and they can see the organizations. So the support should be multi-pronged. It cannot be one. It should be activists, organizations, academics, creators. So everybody should be doing a lot, because we have to counter a narrative that was built for almost 1,000 years. So
that echoes what I tell people often, that the response to hate speech is more speech. So let me ask you this, another question to you, Lavanya, that some say that Hinduism is the same as Hindutva. Others say Hinduism is different from Hindutva. The organizers go to great lengths to distinguish the two and then simultaneously criticize one and demean the other. How do you draw a distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva?
I think the Hinduism, Hindutva, all these are just labels. I talked about it with some of our friends, and we already discussed also that it's a propaganda tool. It's a Goebbels technique. So the terms are given, but the term doesn't mean anything. The term actually identifies a group, small group, but it doesn't mean that only the small group is attacked. The whole group is attacked as a whole. This is one of the Goebbels techniques. So when they say Hindutva, it doesn't mean they're just really focusing on outliers or extremist ideologies. Because I don't see any extremist ideologies or Hindu extremists trying to go and do terror activities in the US or in any other country. I don't see it. And it hasn't happened. And as I already mentioned, in the first decade of the second millennium, they haven't started using Hindutva yet. They used Hindu terrorist and Hindu extremist. And it was not there. But they used it, and of course we had seen the consequences of it. The Hindu temple was burnt. So Hindutva, of course, a narrative is being built that there are Hindu extremists. There is a Hindu extremist narrative, but there isn't. What is going on here is attacking Hindu subject, the Hinduism, isolating Hindu texts to find violence or to find things that can misrepresent Hinduism, misrepresent Hindus, misrepresent India. It doesn't really it doesn't really separate between their activity doesn't really separate between Hindus and Hinduism and Hindutva, because Hindu extremism doesn't exist. There is no group that is actually trying to form extremist groups and support violence. So what is happening here is attacking the whole group. But it's a diversionary tactic. But when the group comes, they tell you, oh, it's not you. And then you'll be quiet. But in reality, it's you. It's everybody. They're attacking the whole group. Because the Hindu extremism or Hindu extremist ideology or Hindu terrorist doesn't exist. Where is that?
Right.
So it's a diversionary tactic. It's a Goebbels technique, Goebbels principles of propaganda. It's one of the propaganda techniques that was previously successfully used, and it's still being used.
Rashmi, this is from someone who's going to be joining the University of Toronto, which is one of the their department at least is a sponsor of this political event. So this individual says, Namaste from India. I will be joining the University of Toronto this fall for my graduate studies. How should I go about engaging in dialogues about tackling Hinduphobia on campus without being canceled or facing any kind of bias from the faculty? Will my opinions or practice of Dharma have any repercussions on my degree outcomes? How should I overcome it?
Firstly, I think good luck with your new academic year. And I hope you have a very, very nice academic year. But I think you should stand you should stand honestly to your beliefs and your systems. And I can't say that there will not be consequences, but there could be consequences. But hey, we are all here, and my DMs are always open to such cases, and we will support you no matter what, and you will only come out stronger. But if you choose to, hide and actively make efforts to unlearn these beautiful aspects of dharma, then in the long run, I think it will have more negative effects in the sense of loss of self-respect and all of that. And there'll be a lot of trauma. So stand up for what you truly believe is true. Be fearless about it. And we are all here to catch you if anything goes wrong.
Thanks for that. And I guess that is my alarm bell to tell me I should wind down. I will put a plug in for HAF's Hinduphobia glossary. It's the first of its kind. And it's a way, we talked a lot about the fine balance between scholars' rights, student rights, and scholars' responsibility to students. But oftentimes, and at the very top of the hour, I talked about language. Are we using the same language in order to convey when something is Hinduphobic? And so this glossary is an effort to empower people, because sometimes we know it when we see it, but other times, as you've heard from both of our panelists, it can be subtle. So that glossary is a resource for everyone to use to be able to understand, not just for ourselves, what are the history of certain words or certain ways of framing our tradition or our beliefs and practices, and understanding the historical context of how they came about, why that might have some sort of racist underpinning. It might have it might be coming from a vantage of religious supremacy. It may be coming from a Marxist lens, but that resource is there to empower every single one of us to be able to speak out. And we should know that we have one another to rely on. I am so thankful to all of you who have taken action. Like I said before, we have not seen this sort of response to an issue because it affects all of us. It hits home. I'm the mom of 2 college-age boys. I want to know that they can go to the university and be free to explore who they are, to ask difficult political questions, to explore their own new emerging political identity. And this sort of activism that's destructive, that denies Hinduphobia, which there's documented evidence of in the past 50 years, it's sad to know that there are genocides and ethnic cleansings that our community has faced. And these are scholars who claim to be scholars of genocide, scholars of religious studies, scholars of history that are actively denying it. And that's a problem. And we all need to speak up against it. So I thank you all for being here. I'm going to hand it back over to Samir. Thank you to you, Lavanya and Rashmi, for sharing with us what was a very rich conversation, and I hope it's the first of many.
Right, thank you, Suhag, and thank you to our wonderful panel. I learned a lot just watching this, and I'm steeped deep in this work every day. So thank you so much again for all of that. Thank you to all of you for joining this evening. I know we've had a very active chat going on and many great contributions, and thank you to everybody that has already donated. For others, please do consider supporting HAF's work. None of these programs or the other advocacy work that we're doing would be possible without your support. Again, we are a small staff. We are a professionalized organization that is taking on a multitude of issues across the spectrum, from education to human rights, to immigration issues, to hate crimes, and of course, Hinduphobia, and much, much more. So we need your support to do it. Many of you that have been chatting have been asking, what more can you do? I know everyone's excited. We've already had a lot of large grassroots campaigns. We've generated over 900,000 emails to the universities. We've had petitions with over 10,000 signatures submitted. We've engaged directly with alumni, educators, academics, elected officials, and more. And it's making a difference. Let's not forget that, you know what, we may not have canceled the program yet, but that's not our goal. You know, the more that we allow these people to expose themselves, the better it is for us. Our goal is to call them out, is to show them for who they really are, and we're already doing that. Within our the first few days of our campaign, all the university logos were removed from the website, which was a huge win. Now it just says the departments from these universities. That's, you know, that's the saving face for this, for the organizer of this event. So let's remember that we are making great progress. We have much more to do at the same time. We will be sending out some more resources and some templates for everyone to continue to take action. It's going to be for alumni of any of these universities, parents of incoming students, or parents of existing students at these universities, as well as any donors that have given money to these universities, because at the end of the day, money is the bottom line. And finally, we will have some action for people at the international level as well, beyond just those in America. So please do stay tuned. And again, continue to follow our work at Hindu American on social media. Support us with your money. Please continue to follow our work on our website, hinduamerican.org. And thank you again for joining this evening. Namaste and good evening.
Namaste.